Okay, today we're going to be installing OSP Racing's new 8-pound turbo kit on our 2014 RGR XP 1000. You can see we've already kind of got our buggy stripped down. We basically removed the stock air box here. We removed the stock header. And we've also removed the throttle bodies, as you can see. So we're going to do some work on these. And that's the stock header. The only thing we got to use off of this is going to be the donut off of here. We've also removed our clutch guard, air box, air tube, clutches, front of the clutch guard. You're going to need a clutch puller to pull your primary clutch. So as you can see, we got our clutch guard removed. We've got our clutch blower just kind of hanging here. And we are ready to start installing and working on putting our turbo kit in. So the first thing we're going to do is just kind of go through the kit and show you. We kind of got some parts laid out here. As we get more stuff built, we'll bring more stuff out because we don't have much room. But basically, you know, some of the kit here, these are the throttle body boots, charge tube adapters, air intake adapter. These are for all the charge tubes. This is the vent for the hose that was attached to the air intake tube. The oil setup. This is the oil adapter for the motor. This is the drain setup for the turbo. This is the adapter for the motor. This is going to go onto the top of the turbo. These are the gaskets for the turbo setup. These are the water tubes. This is our fuel line for tapping into the high pressure fuel system. Strip-on clamp. These are our coolant hoses to hook up our water cooled turbo. So now we'll do some basic setup on the turbo before we go to install it on the machine. It's a lot easier to do on the bench. We got to set up the turbo drain, and we got to put the water fittings on, and we got to get the oil set up. So we'll start with the turbo. Okay, so now we got it in the vise. We are going to take our hex-headed bolt, put it in one of the holes right now before we start to tighten. Okay, and we'll just go ahead and tighten this up until it is pointing back over the hex-headed bolt. Right about there. And so now we'll be able to install it using a wrench, and then our line will still go. Okay, so now we have our oil drain tight, our fitting, and we got our bolts positioned like this. So now we're going to install it on the turbo with the tank facing forward. So we'll go ahead and use our 2 bolts, tighten that down, and we installed the gasket underneath it. Okay, so now we have our drain installed. You see we're pointed back towards the exhaust inlet. The next thing we're going to work on is getting our banjo bolts installed. So the big 90, we're going to take, and it's going to be installed like this. So we'll switch the banjo bolt around, and these go 1 copper washer on each side. So this is going to be like this. So then we can run the hose on the cold side. Okay, so now we've got our banjo fittings on the turbo and tight. We have the forward facing one facing towards the compressor housing, the back one facing down. And now we'll go ahead and install our oil feed banjo bolt, which is going to be this setup right here. This is going to go into the top of the turbo. Alright, so now with our banjo fittings tight on the top, our turbo is now, we'll go ahead and just check all these compressor housing bolts, but they all should be tight. And now we'll go ahead and install our header with our flange gasket in between. And we'll use these 4 5/16 bolts and nuts. Okay, so now we've got our exhaust pipe installed. Our turbo header bolts are tight, our exhaust pipe is tight, and our turbo mount is tight. So now we can go ahead and install our stock springs back on to the spots. And the next thing we're going to start working on is hooking the turbo up to the motor, meaning the oil lines, the coolant lines, and the turbo drain hose. Alright, so now the next thing we're going to hook up is going to be the oil feed line for the turbo. So we're going to take out this plug right here with the 3/8 extension, and then we're going to use the adapter that we provided in the kit right here and this is gonna go into that hole right there. Alright, so now we got our fitting tightened down, Teflon taped on both sides. Just want to check and make sure that the little fitting is tight. Good to go. So now we're going to install our oil line with a 90-degree fitting towards the motor. So we're going to just run this, just going to go ahead and run this up and hook it up right there. And we already have our oil line adapter on the other side of the turbo, so we'll just go ahead and bring that up there, hook that up. Okay, so now we've got our oil line installed. We're going to go ahead and start hooking up our coolant lines to our turbo. So the easiest way is to hook it up to the turbo first, the lines, and then we're going to take off this bypass hose that goes back to the draw on the water pump out of the oil cooler, and we're going to hook the two lines up in between those two barbs. So the shorter hose that we provide you is going to be on the front side of the turbo, front of the machine, on the straight down barb. The longer hose that we provide you here is going to go onto the back side of the turbo with a 90-degree, the top fitting. And the way we're going to hook it up is the front hose is going to hook it up to the bottom inlet right here, and the longer hose is going to get hooked up to this, where this hose comes out right here. So we're basically going to just eliminate this hose. So we're just going to take this one right out. Now when you take this hose out, there's definitely going to be coolant in it. So we got to be, that's why we want to hook our hoses up to the turbo first, so then we can just go ahead, have all our hoses hooked up, pull off this top, switch the hose real fast, and try not to lose too much of the coolant out of the motor. We still have to re-bleed it after we get everything put back together, but the less we lose, the less we have to put back in. Alright, so now we have our coolant lines all hooked up, and we're going to just take and see how this one kind of gets close to the turbo. We want to just zip tie it to this other hose just like that, and then that'll keep it down and out of the way. Just make sure it's not kinked, and then have a nice big loop on the other side to keep it away from the turbo. And this bottom one should be good, and we can zip tie this oil hose so it doesn't get bounced around. And the next job we're going to attempt to do now is install our turbo oil drain. So basically what we want to do with this, alright, so now with our coolant hoses all hooked up, just pull this out of the way. Next thing we're going to work on is putting our oil drain in. So this is going to be our fitting for our oil drain, and we're going to go ahead and install it in this bottom front plug right here. And it's going to be facing up like this, and then we're going to attach this barb, and let's see if I can get you up in there, this barb down here off of the drain that we already installed earlier on the bench, and we will connect that with the 1/2-inch hose provided. Okay, now with our oil drain hose completed here, all tightened up with hose clamps on both sides, taped on both ends, and much hooked up and ready to go. So now we're going to work on getting our air box in, our throttle bodies back on, our charge tubes in, and our air inlet in. Okay, so now with our air intake, we're going to take this and make sure there's no powder coat inside, which I already cleaned this one out. And then we are going to check the injector holes, make sure there's no powder coat in there, which you can see we've already cleaned those out. And then we're going to take and lightly grease the top and the bottom of the O-rings. And you're going to have to just take and push the injector in and give it a little twist to ensure that it's fully seated down into the hole, and then you can look in and you can see how the metal piece protrudes fully through the hole, and that's going to tell you that the injector is sitting squarely down in and the O-ring is engaged on the lip. So now with our injectors like that, we're going to go ahead and install our studs with some red Loctite on the bottom, and then we'll go ahead and tighten these studs up with double nuts. And then once they're Loctited into the base, then we can go ahead and install the fuel rail. So we'll go ahead and just double nut one and show you kind of what we do. So you're basically going to put one nut on top of another, tighten the two nuts up to each other, and then you'll have a place to go ahead and tighten the stud up. So we'll go ahead and hold it here, tighten it up, and then you can see we can just go ahead, wrench the stud in with Loctite. And we'll just go ahead and take these down until they're snugged up, and we'll use the same technique for the other two bolts. Okay, so now we've put our fuel rail in a vise and tightened our fitting up with a lot of Teflon tape. And now we're just going to go ahead and take 3 nuts and red Loctite them and go ahead and install on the studs that we just installed. And the other thing we got to make sure is that our injectors are pushed all the way down and that they are looking square, and that we have about a 1/16 of smush underneath the fuel rail here. You can see I can't quite push it all the way to the base. That is perfect because we want to be able to tighten up the O-rings as the bolts tighten.